Hey guys, it's Crossroads here. Today I want to talk about Bitmine, ticker symbol BMNR, specifically why I'm buying more Bitmine, and of course, an update on the stock as well. Now, it's been a tough hold, I'll admit that. It's one of those where I said this is a swing position, but one that I plan to use at least 2 years just because this sort of thing I figured could happen. I figured it would happen in the face of a crypto winter, which we're not seeing yet. We can see, of course, Bitmine popped up quite a bit over the last week. It is down by about 15%. That is including the end of last week as well. And Ethereum's only down 3.06%. So, what exactly is going on? Is there anything wrong with the thesis and why I keep buying more despite the price action? So, of course, Bitmine does give us these weekly updates, which I really appreciate because it helps us know exactly where we're at in the goal. Now, there's a couple of measures that we can look at Bitmine to see whether they're successful or not. First, they've made a promise to, over time, not dilute shareholders by essentially selling under the MNAV value of the stock, but instead they will sell when the stock is overvalued, buying more Ethereum, getting to that 5% of the Ethereum ecosystem, which is why they call it the alchemy of 5%. And over time, increasing the amount of Ethereum per share for shareholders. So that's something that has continued to increase, although we don't get a great read on that specific piece, except for quarterly when they give their stock update, and we know the number of shares. But we can see that they are heading in the right direction with their stated goal of 5%. So they'll need a little bit over 6 million Ethereum, and they just hit the 4 million mark. Now, there's a couple of other interesting things about this update too. The liquidity is still there. It's not as high as it has been, and we'll actually see quite a bit less liquidity this week. Tends to be a lower liquidity week heading into Christmas and maybe the day after as well, although we are hopeful on that Santa Claus rally. But regardless, it gives an update of where they are in the ecosystem, and Tom Lee added some remarks. And so beyond this first bit about the milestone, he said, we are making rapid progress towards the alchemy of 5%. We're already seeing the synergies born from our substantial ETH holdings, which is pretty interesting. They say we are a key entity bridging Wall Street's move onto the blockchain via tokenization, and we have been heavily engaged with the key entities driving cutting-edge development in the DeFi community. Would love to hear more on that. And, of course, the shareholder meeting is in January. It wouldn't surprise me if we do get a bit of an update on that as well, hopefully before the next earnings report. But regardless, that is looking good, and things seem like that they're on the goal, even though it doesn't feel like that in terms of price action. Let's take a look here at Blockworks, and we can see and compare Bitmine to other digital asset treasuries, and they just continue to accumulate left and right, while others do not as well. So again, that seems like it's working out. And part of my thesis, going back to August, was that this amount of volume would continue, and you'd actually see other players kind of getting squeezed out in terms of volume. If we look at this by percent, you can see BMNR typically trades around 90% of the volume of digital asset treasuries for Ethereum. And over time, that's actually increasing, not decreasing. And so again, this is absolutely working. Now, if you're looking at the outstanding MNAV, they're just trading barely above their MNAV, the implied value of those assets that are under the holding. This could be a slightly above or below. By the way, look at ETHZilla. It's back under there by 0.35. Don't be surprised if they, in fact, end up selling some more Ethereum. Not Bitmine, by the way, but it's ETHZilla, and buying back some of their shares under value. Can't blame them, but they're a little bit out of gas. By the way, that was the other interesting thing, is you can still see they have quite a bit of money there, and there's a good reason for that. The reason is actually kind of pointed out here. I saw a lot of these type of posts. Well, not that one so much, but this is from Altcoin Daily. We'll ignore the comments at the very bottom there, but it says, screenshot circulating on Reddit shows Tom Lee's 7K December Ethereum target is now an $1,800 target next year, also calling for a huge pullback in equities and crypto performing the worst. LOL. But that's not really the case of what's happening here. By the way, many others pointed that out too, not just that one individual. This was a really good reply, and I think Tom Lee actually reposted this as well. It kind of broke down what's happening here. But of course, Tom Lee is the president. He's the chairperson of BMNR. So what he says about Ethereum and crypto in general is well worth paying attention to. Frankly, if you don't think so, look back at what he was saying about crypto back in 2017, 2018, and people were calling him crazy with his price targets. Now, I think he is too aggressive on his price targets. Case in point, he did shift some of what he was expecting out a little bit further. And I don't know that we'll ever hit those lofty price targets as soon as he expects. But he is certainly not bearish. But Fundstrat is more than just Tom Lee. I know that's maybe shocking and surprising. And so, in essence, what this post, and I encourage you to check it out yourself, by Convex Dispatch talks about is the different people that are involved. So you have Tom Lee, you have Sean Farrell, and you have Mark Newton as well. And so from a technical TA standpoint, things look a little bit bearish for crypto, according to Mark Newton. Sean Farrell says, yes, there's some issues here as well, but he's looking at it from a different standpoint. Tom Lee is more focused on liquidity and overall macro and dynamics as well. So we'll have to see which of these is right. This is not Tom Lee contradicting himself, but instead people looking at this from different angles, which frankly is what you and I should really enjoy and appreciate, because if we all look at things the exact same way, we are in an echo chamber. We're going to be missing a lot of things as well. So I think part of that 1 billion amount, and we've seen this elevated cash here for a couple of weeks now, I expect that that's probably going to continue to be the case, that they will hold that just so that they can be strategic. If the stock price dips under the MNAV, that they can start buying back their stock using that $1 billion, which will help. But even more so, if Ethereum just dumps and they're still trading above MNAV, they can maintain that cash. And by the way, if Ethereum does dump, it's going to be pretty easy for them to hit this goal fairly soon. I mean, they're going to probably hit it in the first quarter or early second quarter anyway. Now, beyond this, there's a couple of interesting things that's happening as far as the reserve. Now, one is this is keeping track of, if you look at all the exchanges, every single one of them that are out there, there's a couple of tools that measure this, but they all show about the same thing. This one's on Crypto Quant. Over time, and I've showed this graph before, you can see that the exchange, midsummer was about 21 million Ethereum, and now it's it's at 16 million. Now, it did go up over this last week. That can happen from time to time. You can see it went up here, and you can have that for a week or two or three. But there is a lot of buying pressure that overall that is coming on to Ethereum now. So I think that we'll see more outflows rather than inflows, and we'll continue to over time. This drop from about 21 million down to 16 and a half is precipitous. And again, a lot of it is because of Bitmine. Now, the other side of that coin is when Bitcoin hits that 6 million amount, if they stop buying Ethereum and they're just done with it, there's a lot less buying pressure there, especially because we've seen those other digital asset treasuries. They're not really buying much. And in fact, Zillow might be selling more. But there's a lot of other institutions as well that are loading up, a lot of retail and individuals as well. There's, of course, the ETFs. So there's a lot of buying pressure. In fact, governments as well. So I think there's continued to be a lot more pressure that's buying pressure and rather than selling pressure. And one of the things that Tom Lee is talking about, is the macro is actually pretty solid. Now, January, we might see a further pullback, and they're being defensive as a result of that. But we are looking at in that first quarter and a half or so, much larger than normal federal tax returns, because again, tax law changed under President Trump, and the withholding was not adjusted for Americans. And so Piper Sandler put out research here about a month ago saying that the average refund for taxes is increased for Americans. It's actually more than I remember what they had said, but it's around $1,500, between $1,000 and $2,000. So it's, there's a wide range there, but it's kind of like a mini stimulus. And when you have those sort of events, I mean, you can look, this isn't stimulus, but it's kind of like a mini stimulus event. It tends to help the equities do quite well. And also Ethereum, there's also more, hopefully not too much inflation, but more velocity as well as in terms of money. So that's one of those little things that I think might be a nice boost for Ethereum. And one of the reasons why I have bought more BMNR and plan to continue to add a little bit more here and there. I already have a pretty large position, so I'm not being as aggressive as I would be if that wasn't the case, but I don't mind adding more here. Now, another indicator that things are heading right in the right direction. This is the stable coin market just for Ethereum. And if you look at the overall stable coins as well that are not built on Ethereum, again, it's still over half the volume. Now, it's been relatively flat. Ethereum has traded right along with it as well. I don't see much weakness there. And some other indicators here as well. This is on Dune. It's called the ETH report. You can search for that as well. The DeFi report is who created this little protocol. But there's some interesting things that are right in here. So if we scoot, by the way, this was one of those things I pointed out on X. Look how Base is doing in terms of wallet usage as a layer 2 on top of Ethereum. Another reason why, again, Ethereum is positioned so well is because many people are building on this. Of course, it's not just Base or Arbitrum, but yeah, those are getting a lot of volume. ETH continues to be staked. Yes, there's been some outflows recently. Nothing to see there. Total value locked is not as high as it used to be, but you can still see that staking, you've not seen a massive rush for the exits or anything like that, even though the ETH market cap has not been great. And yeah, net stablecoin transfer volume continues to remain robust. You can draw the trend and see that it has continued to improve, even though that's well off its top spike here midsummer as well. And Ethereum supply is looking very diverse and very good as well. So yeah, nothing is really wrong with the thesis. It's just Ethereum itself has not accumulated in terms of price. And there's a little bit of pressure on it for that reason. So again, I'm giving this time I had planned for this to be at least a 2-year play. I still think that that's going to be the case. And if Tom Lee is right in terms of his price targets, or even not even close to it as right, let's look at one more thing just to see where Ethereum can possibly go and Bitmine with it as well. We're going to look at just BMNR. Actually, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to look at, even though it's a very different play, we can kind of figure out basically where, when Ethereum begins to accumulate in price, depending on where it goes, where BMNR might trade in terms of a multiple above the MNAV. We can do that by looking at strategy, MSTR. All right, so here is showing strategy over time, basically how it has functioned above and below the MNAV. Now, as crypto moved from winter to actual summer, it took a little while for them to begin trading above their one as far as the MNAV. But you can see strategy, even though it's a different play and again, a different crypto, it trades, usually above a 1.4, but I would say around a 1.6 to 1.7 is average. It has gone as high as a 2.35. And if you look at Bitmine, it's not so different. But again, we have a lot less of a track record. We don't have a full cycle with Bitmine functioning as this. But let's look at outstanding MNAV. Let's turn that off and let's just do BMNR. And we are zoomed out a little bit more. Okay, so this will probably never happen again. This is when it transitioned and Tom Lee began to be involved. We did see a spike kind of similar to MSTR where it was above a 2, and it has been trading downward. Now, part of this too is just kind of the function of the business of BMNR, that they are not using debt, but instead they're using their own share price. So they're selling their shares, buying Ethereum. It does have a negative effect in terms of price. But we can see when, this play was a little bit earlier, and it was a little bit spikier as well. You can see that 1.4, 1.5 number as well. I wouldn't quite expect BMNR necessarily to trade at that, but if it trades at a let's just say 1.5 MNAV, Ethereum right now is trading about $3,000. So we're looking at, by the way, it's essentially trading at what it's worth for the underlying Ethereum. Tom Lee has put out some price targets here. I want to show you this. This is from earlier in the month. Nothing has really shifted except for maybe it's being pushed back a little bit by Tom Lee, but he's still very bullish. And if it goes even to half this amount, we're in for some very good times. Let's see.
Okay, so let me explain to you why Ethereum, now that we've talked about crypto, Ethereum is the future of finance. And what I mean by that is Ethereum in this year, it's having its 1971 moment. But what I'm saying is that in 1971, the dollar went off the gold standard. And in 1971, it galvanized Wall Street to create financial products to make sure the dollar would be the reserve currency. Well, in 2025, we're tokenizing everything. So it's not just the dollar that's getting tokenized, but it's stocks, bonds, real estate. And Wall Street is again going to take advantage of that and create products onto a smart contract platform. And where they're building this is on Ethereum. And today, if you look at the share of real world assets, and the prior panel talked about that, the majority of this, the vast majority, is being built on Ethereum. Even he has said Ethereum has won the smart contract war. As you know, Ethereum has been range bound for 5 years, as I've shaded here, but it's begun to break out. And that's one of the reasons why myself and Mosaics, Shen from Mosaics is here, we got very involved with Ethereum by turning Bitmine into an Ethereum treasury company because we saw this breakout coming. Now, this might actually be more important because Bitcoin and Ethereum are really the two most important crypto L1s or blockchains out there. But if 2025 is about tokenization, that means Ethereum's utility value should be rising. Therefore, you should watch this ratio. Well, I think Bitcoin's going to get to 250,000 within a few months. And if Ethereum price ratio to Bitcoin gets back to its 8-year average, that's $12,000 for Ethereum. But I think Ethereum is going to become the future of finance, the payment rails of the future. And if it gets to 0.25 relative to Bitcoin, that's 62,000. So I think Ethereum at 3,000, of course, is grossly undervalued.
So yeah, let's go back to that chart just a little bit here. And so I would be skeptical that we get to 62,000 anytime soon. Probably, since I mentioned it's a 2-year play, I don't think I'll see that in 2 years. Depending on whether or not crypto winter hits, how hard it hits, I don't think it would be too hard if it hit right now. Usually there's a blow off the top rally, and I'm kind of expecting that actually before we get into a crypto winter. Could be wrong on all of that. We'll see. But this right here is not a crazy price amount for Ethereum, about $12,000. So about 4x from where we are. So again, if you're looking in terms of price momentum, when the momentum of Ethereum starts to swing the opposite direction, like we saw as far as an early read with Bitmine, like we've seen with Strategy and its relation with Bitcoin as well, that adds a lot as far as not only to the underlying MNAV, but also to the MNAV premium that Bitmine trades above it. So hypothetically, let's say that we do get to, I'm not saying we're necessarily going to get to, this is kind of the ultra bull case in my mind of $12,000 this next year for Bitmine at some point, before crypto winter, maybe crypto winter is held off another year. We'll see. Where exactly then would Bitmine be trading? Now, it does depend on the number of shares and share count and everything that happens between now and then. But let's say hypothetically, that happened today. All of a sudden, so let's pull up our chart again. So if we're trading at $30 a share, we're basically at a 1 MNAV. Let's say that we get to 1.5 in this. If Ethereum ends up accumulating massively and it does a 4x this next year, BMNR probably is going to be trading around a 1.5 MNAV or higher. And so that puts us at about a 6x from here. So we would be trading at somewhere around, let's see, $30 times 6, $180 a share. So am I saying that this is guaranteed? No. Again, I've done a recent video where I talk about the worst case scenario, and it's good to know both sides of that. But as far as what can happen if everything kind of lines up really nicely over this next year, I see this as potentially being a 6x. Now, I think it's going to take a little bit longer than that to play out, but that is why I continue to buy BMNR. I see some other great opportunities out there in the market. I'm adding to those as well, not going all in BMNR despite the hat that's behind me, but a 6x, which I don't think is absolutely crazy, especially because I feel like we're trading relatively near where the floor might be. Maybe a little bit lower that we can have as well, especially in January as the year just starts out. But I am very excited by this potential, and I'm adding to this play. That's just what I'm doing. Let me know what you're doing in the comments. I would love to hear it. If anything has changed in your mind, if this has taken longer than perhaps you perceived initially that this would take, and if you see anything else, it might be a yellow or red flag. I'd love to hear it. As always, thank you guys for watching, commenting, and subscribing. Till next time, happy investing.